Well, this morning we are going to at least learn that the Solicitor General has given advice to Anthony Albanese on Scott Morrison's seizing of secret portfolios that his colleagues didn't even know about. So that's where this story is at this morning. And then, of course, when Parliament resumes, it might be a whole other thing. So joining me live is the Greens Senator for New South Wales, David Shoebridge. David, thanks so much for your time. First of all, Anthony Albanese did hint yesterday that he didn't think anything illegal had been done, but he certainly wants to make sure it can't happen in the future. Is that about right?
Well, I mean, we will review with interest the report from the Solicitor General, but of course the Solicitor General provides advice to the government and the executive of the day, and it's, you know, the executive has an interest in allowing itself the greatest possible flexibility to appoint ministers and notify or not notify the public. The Parliament will obviously may have a very different view about whether or not these secret appointments were lawful, whether or not they complied with the Constitution. So we will review with interest what the Solicitor General says, but that will by no means be the end of the investigation, at least from a parliamentary perspective, because both the Senate and the House have very distinct interests to the government of the day when it comes to these kind of the power to secretly or otherwise appoint ministers.
Well, you have these instruments, right? You have the Privileges Committee, you can investigate it, you can censure the former Prime Minister, but what is actually the point of doing either of those things when Scott Morrison is no longer the Prime Minister? He can no longer appoint himself to these secret portfolios. Is it more than just making a political point, or is it just that?
Well, normally people like accountability, and it's peculiar, isn't it? We're having this conversation now about, well, you know, there were misdeeds in the past, and what's the point of holding someone to account for their misdeeds in the past? If it wasn't a politician, this question would not even be asked. Of course, people should be held accountable for misdeeds, and if someone's had the most important and senior office in the country, and, you know, behaves in a manner which is either potentially unlawful or unconstitutional or just plainly, deeply morally wrong, well, of course there should be accountability. And the idea we would just say,
but what I'm trying to get to, Senator,
is
what's the material
kind of
effect of doing this in Parliament, though? What is the material effect?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that accountability, that it would be a message to any future Prime Minister or future politician that if you wanted to flout constitutional conventions, if you wanted to potentially breach the law, well, then you're going to be dragged in front of the Privileges Committee and held to account. But by no means is the beginning and the end of this an investigation in the Privileges Committee, because the Privileges Committee can only look at the role of members, and in this case, the Prime Minister and maybe other ministers who are complicit in it. Obviously, there's a deeper problem here, which has been exposed by this, which is what, if any, role the Governor-General had or should have had in the notification and accountability. And also, this wouldn't have just been crafted in the mind of the Prime Minister. It would have been with the advice and support, most likely, from his own department and potentially the Attorney-General's department. So what, if any, role the public service had, and particularly senior members of the public service had, in the creation and continued hiding of these ministries, I think also needs to be investigated. And that will inevitably involve an inquiry broader than just the Privileges Committee.
Well, we've revealed here on this program this morning that Scott Morrison was the Secret Finance Minister. At the same time, he was calling for an independent review into Christine Holgate after humiliating her on the floor of Parliament over the Watches saga. Now that we know what we know, Senator, what should happen there? It doesn't seem at all independent if he was sworn into this portfolio.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, I think as we review his conduct over those 2 years when he had those parallel ministries, I think more of these questions are going to arise. And even in circumstances where he didn't formally exercise the power in those ministries, the fact that a minister knew that this power to intervene and override the substantive minister at any time existed, that seriously impacts on the ministerial independence that the minister is meant to have under our law. Now, look, the Prime Minister, if he doesn't like the call that a minister makes at any point in time, the Prime Minister can sack the minister. But what we can't have is the Prime Minister just overriding or being in a position to override the minister in their day-to-day exercise of ministerial duties. So, I mean, that I think is something the Parliament has a very real interest in reviewing. One of the ways is through the Privileges Committee, but I don't think that's the only avenue that we should be investigating this through.
Well, given this Christine Holgate scenario and the lack of independence, even though the Finance Minister at the time didn't know, should there be some kind of recompense for her? At the very least, she's deserved an apology, isn't she?
Well, I think on any view of it, that was a very capable woman in a position of leadership who should never have been treated in the way she was by the Prime Minister at the time. And of course, now we see there's even additional reasons to view the Prime Minister's conduct as a fairly appalling set of circumstances. And it's, you know, it's not my position here on the fly to make a determination of that, but you would hope that if a Privileges Committee hearing happens or a broader inquiry happens, that would be one of the obvious case studies to review. You know, standing up in Parliament, using the pulpit in the way that the Prime Minister did, and then failing to tell people at the same time that he actually also held the ministerial responsibility in that portfolio. It's the kind of conduct, the kind of, I would say, basically deceitful conduct that brings politics into disrepute.
I've just received a statement from Christine Holgate as well. I was disappointed, she says, as everyone else, to learn that the former Prime Minister had secretly taken on the most important roles in Cabinet. The fact he was secretly Finance Minister when the Finance Department were apparently conducting an independent inquiry into my matter is very concerning. So that statement just from Christine Holgate, that's fair enough, isn't it, Senator?
Well, I join with her in that concern, and I think any fair-minded observer would join with her in that concern. You know, it calls into question the very independence of that inquiry, and I say again, you know, this is one of those clear case studies that should be before the Privileges Committee, and at a minimum, in investigating exactly what went wrong here.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. That statement just coming through, so it was good to get your immediate reaction to that. We'll see you in Canberra.
Thanks, Laura.